Hi, and good morning. This is Reverend Lydell Lettsome, one of the founding members of the Vanguard Health Equity Project. I am so sorry I could not be able to do this live with you all this morning, but once again, nonetheless, I am grateful for the opportunity, and I hope that this brief video will be of benefit to you and just help you understand, not understand, but get some perspective as you make a decision on to get vaccinated or not. And the title of the talk today is to vaccine or to not vaccine. So moving right along, I'm going to go through sort of like five broad areas, for lack of a better word. Starting off with managing our faith. The science is still science. What is the goal of all of this vaccination hubbub? What do we know right now about the current vaccines available? And how should we kind of line up or prepare to even participate in the vaccination process if that's what we're thinking about? So let's start with first managing our faith. Why would I say this? Because this is an act of faith. So I asked you this morning, where is your faith? We have to really be honest with ourselves and understand that very few of us are scientists. Immunology and virology are complex sciences, even for those of us who are scientists. So this is going to be an act of faith. The average person walking around does not have the wherewithal to understand immunology and virology. I don't care how much trial site news you watch or MedDoc or WebMD. This is not something that the everyday person is well versed in. But thankfully, there are people out there who are really skilled in this. So I think as you make your decision and talk about the vaccines, you really need to be honest with yourself and acknowledge the fact that you are probably carrying both conscious and unconscious biases. This whole process has been politicized and even to a certain extent religionized, if that's a word, and that none of us are really thinking about this objectively. And that's what I really want to push this morning is that you approach this objectively and then make your decision. One of the biases, people of color. Already there's some notable pastors of color who've said they can't make a comment, they don't feel comfortable encouraging their congregations to participate. And there's real historical evidence of that. The Tuskegee experiment, where more than a couple hundred black men were given syphilis, Henrietta Lacks, and her cells being used taken from her to use as cancer cell lines and all kinds of scientific cell lines, to the famous obstetrician and gynecologist Marion Sims routinely operating on women of color without any anesthesia. But as we think about that bias from one group, there's some things to know. The Willowbrook hepatitis trials, which happened in mental health institutions in 1970 and up to 1972, and as unethical as it is, it's one of the highlight of unethical studies, just like the Tuskegee experiment. It also actually played a key role in development of the hepatitis vaccines, or as recently as the SFBC Miami trials, where the center itself, not necessarily the companies, but the center itself just ran unethical screenings and testings on people. As these things happen, one of the things I want you to think about is on this side of the slide is that we have things now like informed consent. We have the 1974 Research Act, which means that there's a certain set of standards that companies and governments must follow to do clinical things with people, which led to the Miami not only leading to lawsuits but prosecutions and peer reviews. That things happen now where you just can't go and do experiments and get them published in New England Journal of Medicine, with, like what happened with the Willowbrook hepatitis trial. That you have to, the peer review and not only now covers the science but also covers the ethics of the science. And then institutions of their own are required to have review boards so that you can't have one person experiment, one or two people experimenting with people, that objective people have to oversee what's going on. So yeah, there's things to be concerned about, there's issues of trust and concern, but do know that there's also accountability things in place. Beyond that, though, we have to really be clear in our mindset that if we're going to get to the right answers, we got to begin with the right questions. And some of the things that were sent to me were things about ivermectin and, of course, the hydroxychloroquine. These medications and things, I know people and even elected officials have said they work, but do they really? And why? You have to ask yourself, why are you concerned about this? Why would you want to take ivermectin over a vaccine? When I hear that stuff and hear ivermectin being pushed by groups like Physicians for a Positive America, that that just doesn't sound like a group I want to get medical advice from. I know that the social media is out there with all kinds of good advice about things, but what I find really interesting is, who are these people? What are their credentials really? And are you sure that the credentials they're posting is actually credible credentials? So I just think no matter where you go with this, whether it's the vaccine, your belief in the actual severity of COVID-19, you got to make sure you're asking yourself the right questions. And because if you don't ask the right questions, you're almost guaranteed to come up with wrong answers. And as you ask yourself the right questions in the area of COVID-19, you'll need to understand this is a science thing. This isn't a political issue. This isn't a religious issue. This isn't a cultural issue. This is a science public health issue. So, above all else, your questions should be rooted in science, not any kind of political or religious loyalties. Science. So, some basic virology. Viruses aren't living organisms. They don't behave like bacteria where they could kind of self-sustain themselves. They have to blend in with a host. And then when they do that, they tend to cause systemic infections, not localized infections. They're usually devastating or deadly, believe it or not. And I am putting that out there because I think historically we've lost perspective of what vaccinations have done for our society. And I'll get into that in just a second. They have an outer protein coat. Like I said, they're not living organisms, so they don't have cell walls. So when you're hearing all of this talk in media about spike protein and nucleocapsids, it's because viruses don't have cell walls. Vaccines are made to control spread and to improve mortality or death when it comes to viruses. So one of the things I want you to look at on this side here: measles, adenovirus, cytomegalovirus, hepatitis virus, parainfluenza, the herpes simplex virus, the norovirus, the Coxsackie B virus, rubella, and of course smallpox. Most of these things now are afterthought in American culture. These things were killing people by the thousands. Things that we now view as at worst cold sores or a sore throat were killing thousands of Americans in the early 1900s. So we've come a long way, and we have a history of things being better than not. I'll leave it at that. How do vaccines work? Well, the whole goal of the vaccine is to help the body fight a virus. So usually what we do is we give the patient a weakened form of the virus. Then the body is able to create antibodies to fight the virus. If the actual virus ever enters the host, they already have the antibodies ready to go and attack the virus. That is why in February and last year we were hearing so much of all of this novel coronavirus, is because very few people in the population had any antibodies of previous exposure to this virus. More specifically, how the coronavirus vaccines that we have now will work. The scientists have studied the spike protein, and I'll get into that a little bit more, on the outer protein line of the virus. Remember, the viruses don't have cell walls, and they've made RNA, genetic material, that can target the protein. So they've injected the RNA protein, spike protein, into your body. So when the coronavirus enters us and it's roaming around our bodies, we will already have not only some T cells, which is really what the vaccine is going to generate, but we'll also have some antibodies that will be ready to bind to the spike protein of the coronavirus, then preventing the coronavirus from entering human cells and making the human cells sick. As I share that with you, it's one thing to know that vaccines in of themselves aren't cures, though. They help us fight a response, but they aren't virus killers per se. What vaccines do is help the body have a police force, for lack of a better word, to identify, attack, and control a foreign agent. So, scientifically, the things are called T cells and antibodies. The T cells, medically, we call the cellular response. The antibodies, we call the humoral response. The T cells are the faster response, but the antibodies are the more effective and long term response. So, as one of the questions scientifically will be, what kind of antibody response will these vaccines generate? And they're still studying that. The goal is a herd immunity, which will take some time. Are there some side effects? Yes. There's no perfect vaccine. The whole thing of vaccination is to make your body have a response. So, of course, there's going to be side effects because that's how vaccines work. The question that you should have in your mind is not are there side effects, but are the reactions severe? How frequent are they? And are they treatable? Once again, I go back to what I said earlier. This is about asking the right questions. So far, the known side effects of these two vaccines that are available are fatigue, headaches, and muscle aches. And I must stress that very few patients at all needed hospitalization for the fatigue, muscle aches, headaches, and muscle aches. Um, Deaths. Everyone question on everyone's mind. More than 80,000 people were exposed uh, during these clinical trials. And amazingly enough, the deaths were single digits. That's very impressive for me. I I don't know what if that's impressive to you or not, but I will say when you've exposed 50,000 at a clip and your deaths are less than 10 and not all of them are clearly related to the virus, that's the vaccine you gave, that's pretty good. Clinical trials. What are clinical trials? Well, this slide shows you the classic route of a clinical trial where you start testing a drug on healthy individuals and you're really then just trying to find out what is a safe dose and are there any side effects. Then you want to see to a larger group of people who actually have the problem and does it help them and how, which is what efficacy is, does it help them with their health problem, and are the side effects there or are the side effects tolerable? Then you expand it out to a completely larger demographic and you want to see for long term effectiveness and you want to compare it with other things out there. Quite frankly, this is where we are in America, phase three, because we're testing it for long-term effectiveness in terms of these vaccines, and as more vaccines come out, we'll be comparing them to which ones are better. The FDA gave the approval because we're in a global pandemic and people are dying, and we want not only to save lives, but we want the country to move forward. As you are getting the vaccines, you're going to be participating in the phase four aspect of this. But no, this is not the first time that the public at large is the phase four of a trial for a clinical drug or a clinical entity. How did this happen so fast? Another question on everyone's minds. Well, interestingly enough, this happened because of the pandemic response teams, which I just have to say what it is. Our current president and our current group of Republicans were so set against and so hell bent on closing down when President Trump took office. Amazingly enough, the scientists who were part of the pandemic response team continued their research, several of them, through the NIH and others and some private entities, and they already had 6 years of global research going. And part of what they had identified was 24 pandemic families. Dr. Fauci is part of the global pandemic response team, was part of the scientists who understood that there are 24 families of viruses out there that they feel could cause a global pandemic at any moment and that they needed to focus on getting vaccines and treatments available for. And at the top of his list years ago of one that could break loose and cause a lot of problems was the SARS virus. This lady here, Dr. Kizmina Corbett, She actually was working on a SARS variant and came up with the idea to make a vaccine towards the spike protein based on her previous research. And her research was the pattern for our two current vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer. And she's gone on record, if you've had a chance to see her in public interviews, that she staked her reputation on the scientific efficacy, objectivity, and safety of the vaccines created thus far. So, what is the goal of all this? The goal is actually herd immunity. I'm stating this because I know socially some people think the goal is for everyone to go back to work, for schools to open up, and for us to have a great time on beaches. That is not the goal. The goal is herd immunity. And this slide, I'm sorry if it's not clear, shows what herd immunity looks like in practice. So on this side here, we see the red infected people, but you see the healthy white dots, and this shows that all these people can get affected from this one center person. So you got three here, but this whole row can get infected from this person. All these people over here, all these people over here. So you go from one person, maybe three today, and 4 days later, you got 10. Whereas when you have herd immunity and the majority of people are vaccinated, even though you got two people infected, look at this. There's a possibility of only one, two, three more people getting infected. So that's what these vaccines are about, getting control about how many people could get severely infected from this disease. Thankfully, 100% efficacy is not needed. We need these things to help the bodies fight, build up enough immune response that people won't get deathly ill. So the benefits of this is one, improve public safety, decrease deaths, decrease ICU admissions, hospitals being overflowed and on shutdown and double shifts. Like, no, we need that to end. Decrease psychological devastation, the mental health toll, the substance abuse that's going on. We all in the Lifeline conference know this. There's more than just people dying in ICUs that's happening here, and the goal is to hope this vaccine stops that, stops the transmission, stops the fear, stops the psychological fallout, and improve the public safety. As these vaccines do what we need them to do, we must all still know that universal precautions will still matter, proper personal and public hygiene will still matter, and that eradication will take time. So we need to continue to exercise patience. What do we know so far about the vaccines? They are not the actual live virus. There's very, very low fatalities. The side effects that has been present so far, and we are now into week 4 of people getting vaccinated, are very minimal. That we still have supply and storage issues, that a lot remains unknown, but the good short term looks is that these give good short term protection, that they are working, and that they give good short term protection. To the right here, this is the basis of the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. Why I want to show this is the question of this type of vaccination. I personally feel that the mRNA type and the sRNA type are the futures of vaccines, as this slide clearly shows. Live attenuated and live recombinant. These are things that, can have rapid production, but they run the risk of reverting to a virulent, which means a uncontrollable form of the virus reproduced in people. The same thing here with the inactivated live virus. These ones are not as great. I expect as we get more polymerase chain reaction capabilities, as we more and more understand genes and mRNA transcription and translation, we're going to have more mRNA and sRNA vaccines, because not only are they relatively cheaper to make and reproduce, but they're also safer. Distribution of these vaccines. Your dosing is usually at 1 or 3 weeks, actually 4 weeks now. The places where they will be are hospitals and pharmacies, and eventually workplaces and even curbside. Pfizer and Moderna, both of them require two dosings, and you want to do your best to get the same. Don't get a Pfizer and then a Moderna, or Moderna and Pfizer. Although the companies are saying they don't expect that to have any effects, they haven't tested it. So the recommendation is to get the same type of vaccine each time. And furthermore, that you should walk out of there, if you do choose to get the vaccine, with your second dose appointment on your card. For those who are really worried about, well, what does a reaction look like, a severe reaction? First of all, for almost anything, a severe reaction is something that's going to happen in 15 and 30 minutes. So if you go someplace vaccinated and they tell you you can't leave for 20 minutes, that's why. Because if you're going to have a real reaction, it's going to happen within 20 minutes. And what you'll experience is difficulty clearing your throat, intense nausea, like not just light nausea, but almost painful nausea, dizziness, heart pounding in your chest, feeling like you're about to faint. You'll see some swelling and itching all over your skin. Those are the things that, if you have that within 15 to 20 minutes, lets you know you're about to have a severe reaction. Who's eligible to get vaccinated? If you've been previously infected with a COVID infection, yes. If you have a current COVID infection, no. We're asking people to wait at least 14 days before they consider getting a vaccine if they're currently COVID positive. If you have previous antibodies or plasma therapy, yes, you are still eligible, because they're still not certain to your, particularly for the plasma therapy, if that is immunogenic enough for you to be protected. So even if you've had tested positive for antibodies or you've had the plasma therapy, they're still considering that until they get better data, you should get a COVID vaccine if you're in a high risk group. Pregnancy, there are actually pregnant women in the studies, not a high amount of them to make it a statistical significant result, but none of the pregnant women who received the vaccines in the trials had any issues. Breastfeeding, they're going based on previous data of mRNA vaccines, that mRNA vaccines normally did not cause for any issues for lactating women, so they're not ruling out lactating women at this time as well either. How long might your line be? I sincerely don't know. New York Times, and this link is here, and I'll also give it again, has a great questionnaire through this link, and they will help you see where you fit into the vaccine line. Right now, we know the goal at the December 31st was to get 20 million doses distributed, and they did, and to see if they could get 2 million people vaccinated by December 31st. I wasn't able to get a clear count on that. But I show those numbers because I want us to think, as I get near the end, that we got to manage our expectations. As we know so far, we need 150 to 170 million people vaccinated to get herd immunity and to spread. Well, at 20 million doses a month, that's a hard task. In the United States, we got 25 states with less than 5 million people. So let's say you're even doing 5 million people a week. That's hard. If you just say to divide the 20 million by 4 weeks a month, that would be vaccinating entire states every week. So the manpower, the distribution power, it's a Herculean task to say we're going to get 20 million people vaccinated a month. And even if we do get 20 million people vaccinated a month, that is still 7.5 months before we reach herd immunity. So that's July. Be patient. Do not get upset. Do not write threatening letters. Do not cry foul. This is pure science and basic math. Summary. Gotta ask the right questions. And make sure you're talking to the right people who are objective and don't have any kind of political or religious axe to grind. Understand that vaccines aren't cures, so we will still have to deal with COVID-19 on some level regardless of vaccination. The goal of all of this is herd immunity, to protect people from dying from this and going through severe sickness and ending up in the ICUs. Hygiene and physical distancing will still matter for the foreseeable future, so don't throw away your mask. Current vaccines have a good profile, good efficacy, and good safety. All right, but one thing I want to also add, the vaccines aren't effective until your second dose, so please understand that. until about 7 to 10 days after your second dose. Success with this will take time and teamwork, as we are 24 hours after a national incident of people storming the Capitol. We're all Americans. We're all God's creation. We got to stick together through this. This cartoon shows the daughter saying, like, this isn't about us alone. This is bigger than us. This is bigger than today. The daughter is asking mom, what is that mark on your arm? She says, my smallpox vaccine scar. She says, why don't I have one? Because it worked. We have really got to, a lot of us have got to change our perspective about me, myself, and now to we, us, and the future. We, us, and the future. That's what's going to get us through this. Thank you for your time. For resources, the Coronavirus Prevention Network has a lot of great information about the virus, the vaccines, and even future vaccines are coming. Once again, the New York Times line about where you might fit into it. And if you still want some examples of unethical trials and what an unethical trial looks like, this group, SOMO, gave a good example of some unethical trials over the past 30 years. I hope this was helpful. Once again, I'm very sorry I could not do this live, but I thank you all for the opportunity, and I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless, and have a great day.